Hello, and welcome to week 3, your week 3 mini lecture. This week we're looking at Puritan New England and Roman Catholic Maryland. And we'll start this week in Puritan New England with the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Despite their similarities and the fact that they arrived in America within a decade of each other, there are several differences between the Puritans and the Pilgrims. And I will generalize a few of the differences. The Pilgrims settled in Plymouth, and the Puritans settled in Salem and Boston. And while the Pilgrims were separatists, the Puritans were non-separating Congregationalists. They believed the Church of England was the one true church, and they were loyal to England, but not in the way they worshipped. They believed that, quote-unquote, New England worship and practice would be an example for Old England and the world. The Pilgrims were few in number. There were only 102 who sailed across the Atlantic on the Mayflower, and about half died that first winter of 1620. The Puritans came by the thousands, 40 to 50,000 eventually came, and by 1776, 75% of the American population were of Puritan roots. The Pilgrims, for the most part, were of a poorer class, and not all on the Mayflower came for religious reasons. Some came for better economic opportunity in the New World. The Puritans were primarily upper middle class, and while the Pilgrims were not terribly well educated, the Puritans typically were. Over 100 of the first Puritans to come to America had been educated at Oxford or Cambridge, and within 6 years of landing, the Puritans founded the first college, Harvard in Cambridge. Ultimately, however, both the colonies united to form Massachusetts following the Puritans having their charter revoked in 1689, and that will come, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the readings. So Pilgrim William Brewster, and I've provided these links in your syllabus so you can take a look at some of the primary resources linked to these names that I will be listing here in this video. Pilgrim William Brewster has become one of the most famous passengers on the Mayflower. So if you go online, you'll see a lot of genealogies and families trying to link up to the original descendants from the Mayflower, and William Brewster has many genealogy sites listing, linking back to him. So on this voyage in 1620, he reached what became the Plymouth colony, and once arriving in the New World, he became a senior elder and leader in the community. Today, he's known as a Pilgrim Father, and generally considered to be the most famous of the Pilgrims. Another pilgrim, William Bradford, was also one of the passengers on the Mayflower's 1620 transatlantic journey. He was the Plymouth colony's governor for more than 30 years and helped draft some of its legal code. I've given you a link to his book, A Dialogue or Third Conference Between Some Young Born in New England and Some Ancient Men Which Came Out of Holland and Old England. And like all of these primary sources I'm providing for you, some of them are much longer than others, and I don't intend for you to read in the entirety, so I just want you to take a look, especially at the title, at the introductions, so you can get an overall view of the types of writings that were happening at this point in time. On a side note, his copy of the Geneva Bible, William Bradford's copy of the Geneva Bible, which he carried from England to Holland and eventually to Plymouth. It's in the Pilgrim Hall Museum in Plymouth, Massachusetts today. If you ever get a chance in your travels, stop by and take a visit, and you can see that there. So Puritan John Winthrop, he was a famous for the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in England, and he was a strict Puritan, and as a leader of the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, he receives, even to this day, quite a bit of attention. So I'm sure you're familiar with his name. Winthrop and his fellow Puritans believed that they would establish a pure church in New England, one that would offer a model for churches in the motherland and reform the Anglican Church. And so you'll read a model of Christian charity. This is probably something that you've come across before, but I wanted to put that up there to remind you of his lecture to the group of colonists about to depart for Massachusetts Bay Colony, where he lays out this vision for building a godly commonwealth. It's kind of one of those foundational documents. John Cotton is another person that I'll have you look at in your primary source readings. He was the leading figure among the first generations of Puritans in Massachusetts, and during his 21-year ministry, he became increasingly critical of the Church of England and an outspoken advocate of independent congregational governance. And Cotton's grandson, Cotton Mather, who was named after his grandfather, often he locked horns with Roger Williams, who we'll learn a little bit more about in the primary source readings that I have you read this week. And so Cotton and Williams often locked horns, and you'll see that in the primary source readings. And so John Cotton, as well as his grandson Cotton Mather, were some of the most widely admired men in Massachusetts, and the majority in the community agreed with their views and looked to both of them for leadership. So keep that in mind as you read through those primary sources. I've also included a short video for an example of the type of music of the time as represented by the Bay Psalm book, which is the oldest book now in existence that was published in British North America. It was prepared by Puritan leaders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and included a dissertation on the lawfulness and necessity of singing psalms in church. And the composer was Thomas Ravenscroft, and he was an English musician and theorist, and especially known for compiling collections of British folk music. So I thought I would just throw that in there so you could have an opportunity to listen to that. And to kind of sum up this segment of the readings, I want you to read George McKenna's article, Unholy and Blessed People, The Puritan Origins of American Patriotism, which was published in the Yale Review of July 2002. McKenna is a professor of political science at the City College of New York. And I think his analysis of the Puritans will help pull some of these primary source readings together as you look at the legacy of New England Puritanism. Now, George McKenna eventually took that journal article and expanded it into a book, The Puritan Origins of American Patriotism. This was published in 2007. And so if you want to check that out, I would encourage you to read it, maybe not during this course, but at some point you may want to check that out. So after you finish with McKenna, I want you to go on to continue to read some more of the primary source materials. You'll find a link to Roger Williams's book, The Bloody Tenet of Persecution. So Williams was a Puritan minister, theologian, and author who founded the colony of Rhode Island and Providence plantations. And this was after his banishment from Massachusetts Bay in 1635. He was a staunch advocate for religious freedom and for the separation of church and state. And so, as I talked about before, John Cotton's grandson, Cotton Mather, had warned that Roger Williams's ideas were of the utmost danger to the colony itself and would set it aflame. Roger Williams wrote this book in 1664, in which, among other things, he argued for a wall of separation between church and state and for toleration of various Christian denominations. The book itself takes the form of a dialogue between truth and peace, as offered in response to correspondence with John Cotton regarding Cotton's support for state enforcement of religious uniformity in Massachusetts. I believe that was Cotton Mather and not John Cotton in this instance. I have included a link to the entire book, which I do not expect you to read all of it, but rather skim over. Another primary resource you should look at is that of William Penn's, A Brief Account of the Rise and Progress of the People Called Quakers. Penn was born in 1644, and he was an English Quaker leader and advocate of religious freedom who oversaw the founding of the American Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a refuge for Quakers and for other religious minorities. Penn's colony was founded in 1682, and in your text, Gstaad calls Penn's colony a bold invitation to freedom in religion. So then we move on to Maryland at this point. And Maryland was the colonial center for Catholicism, but it would later become the colonial center for Methodism, and we'll learn more about this in another class. So at this time, King Charles had approved a request from George Calvert to establish a colony called the Province of Maryland in 1635. And so George Calvert became the first Lord Baltimore. His son Cecil was only 26 when his father died, and so Cecil then became the second Baron of Baltimore. And it was up to Cecil to establish and govern the new colony, and he wanted to make certain that Catholics and Protestants were treated fairly under the new system of government. He was a Catholic and knew firsthand about the problems that Catholics and Protestants had in living together. And so the Assembly of the Province of Maryland passed an act concerning religion, also called the Maryland Toleration Act of 1649. And this act was meant to ensure freedom of religion for Christian settlers of diverse persuasions in the colony. You'll also read Father Andrew White's journal account of his voyage to Maryland in 1634. He was a Jesuit priest who helped Calvert find Catholic families to settle in the new colony. And he also wanted the Jesuits to establish a Catholic mission in the Maryland colony, and he thought Jesuits were very much well prepared to succeed in converting the Native Americans to the Catholic faith. So you can read an account of his voyage that I've linked in your syllabus. And then once you've completed the primary source readings, you should use your reading in Gstaad, and I hope that you've all managed to get a copy of this text by now. And you can catch up with the readings. This week I'm having you read page 49 to 115, and it will help pull all of this material together into some sort of context for you. And for some visual representation, I ask that you look at some maps at USM's Osher Map Library online so you can have an idea of the territory that we're covering. And I've provided a link for that in your syllabus as well. And please check out the link to the Mitchell map. This is one of the most, if not the most famous of all colonial maps. It's the most comprehensive map of Eastern North America made during the colonial era. Some of you had some questions about where we could learn more about Native American stories, and I will talk more about that in my weekly summary video. But I would encourage you to zoom in on this map and look closely at the wording on the map and see what you can learn from it. There's a lot to take in there. So that concludes my mini lecture just to get you started this week with your readings. As always, if you have any questions, please send me an email, and I wish you all a great week.